Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of SETA DC, I would like to welcome everybody. And I'm sorry we are late a few minutes. Welcome to our panel. Today, we will discuss the U.S. Turkish economic relations and opportunities in the third countries. Our panelists are Mr. Murat Kalsin, the Vice President of Independent Industrialists and Businessmen Association, known as MUSIAD of Turkey, and Mr. Charles Johnston, Chair of U.S. Turkey Business Council and the Senior Vice President of the International Governmental Affairs of Citigroup. As most of you know, historically, the U.S.-Turkey bilateral trade relations have been imbalanced, since most of the bilateral trade between the two countries was in defense-related purchases by Turkey. In the last so many years, both sides, both Turkey and the United States, have been trying a more diversified bilateral trade relations. Also, as most of you know, there are changing regional dynamics in the Middle East. And Turkey has been increasing its role both as an economic and political player in the region. Some might argue that there are also opportunities for US and Turkish cooperation in the third countries. As usual, opportunities always bring new challenges. A more balanced US-Turkey economic relations could contribute to regional economic development and the peace efforts. This is a timely panel. Just let me give you two examples. Last Monday, October the 3rd, the President of the US Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Thomas Donahue, was speaking in Istanbul on the Foreign Economic Relations Board meeting, known as DEIC, and he noted that Turkey and US as strategic allies and trade partners shared several opportunities and should work together for mutual strategic gains. While Mr. Donahue admitted that there was a lack of awareness in the United States regarding the opportunities in Turkey, and US companies did not know what could be done in Turkey, he stressed that Turkey is a producer of first-class goods and has a strategic location and a skilled labor force. While that meeting was in Istanbul, in Ankara, there was another meeting the same day, Monday, October 3rd. This is the representatives of Turkish and US governments meeting, and this was the 7th meeting of Turkey and US Economic Partnership Commission. As you know, these meetings support the common vision to develop a strategic economic partnership in line with already strong political relations. What we understand is that this meeting focused, after the explanations and statements after the meeting, on exploring opportunities to promote innovation, develop specific areas of cooperation, and enhance business-to-business ties. Both sides agreed to seek to strengthen the sectoral cooperation and to promote economic development in third countries, especially in the Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. In these meetings. And in these meetings, U.S. delegation was led by the Assistant Secretary of State for Economics, Energy, and Business Affairs, Jose Fernandez. Just to give you an idea of the latest numbers of between these two countries, in the first 8 months of 2011, from January to the end of August of 2011, Turkish exports to the U.S. reached $3 billion. This is almost a 25% increase compared to the previous year. That is 2010. And U.S. exports to Turkey increased for the same period, for the same 8 months, to $11 billion. That is almost a 50% increase from the $7.3 billion the year before. The overall trade volume, again just for an idea, between the two countries was almost $12 billion in 2009 and $16 billion in 2010. With that, let me turn to our panelists, and we will begin with Mr. Kalsin from MUSIAD. Please.
Thank you so much. Esteemed Chairman, dear participants, I would like to first mention how glad I am to be addressing you here today at the most respected SETA Foundation on behalf of myself and MUSIAD, the Independent Industries and Businessmen Association. I would also like to convey my special thanks to SETA Foundation for organizing this panel on the occasion of the visit of MUSIAD and to the USA with a trade delegation. I believe that our discussion today, which will handle the issue of U.S.-Turkey economic partnership in third countries, carries high importance for all of us here who have been spending serious efforts to establish stronger ties between the two countries. As you well know, Turkey and U.S. have been engaged in many strategic partnerships for many years and been close alliances on different occasions. Still, the trade relations between the two countries have not reached the desired levels yet. Although bilateral trade volume has doubled since 2000 and was recorded as $16 billion in 2010, as Mr. Chairman mentioned. When the magnitude of U.S. economy and the outstanding economic growth of Turkey in this period are taken into account, the current figure definitely seems inadequate. Out of that $16 billion of trade value, $3.7 billion constitutes the exports of Turkey to U.S. and the remaining $12.3 billion comes from the imports from U.S. So these figures also represent an imbalance in the bilateral trade account. Moreover, when these data are analyzed in detail, it's observed that Turkey's exports to U.S. composes only 3.3% of its total exports, whereas its imports from U.S. has a share of 6.6% in the pie of total imports as of 2010. Besides, around 25% of the imports from U.S. are on military goods, ranging from machinery to parts and to vehicles. The rest of the imported products, except for the steel-making materials with a share of around 15%, have really small ratios to the total. As for Turkey's exports to U.S., it's realized that textile, although not as intensive as in the 1990s, is still the number one product with a percentage of 7.3%. And the following popular export goods are cars, stone and sand, as well as iron and steel products. All these leading export products account for nearly 25% of Turkey's total exports to U.S., while each of the rest constitutes small proportions. Hence, just by looking at this simple analysis of bilateral figures, it's easy to notice the undiversified and insufficient nature of Turkey-U.S. relations. In this regard, I believe that it's important to shortly touch on the impressive growth of the economy of Turkey in the last decade. As you well know, after the economic reforms undertaken following the 2001 financial crisis in Turkey, the economy has kept flourishing until today, even having come through the effects of the 2008-2009 global crisis. In 2010, in terms of GDP growth, Turkey has ranked the third in the world with a growth rate of 8.9%. And the biggest contribution to this outstanding growth came from private sector investments. Consumption made up considerable part of this achievement too. Plus, the sector with the highest share in this result has been industrial production. The growth of the economy keeps going in 2011 too, with a 10.2% of GDP growth within the first half of the year. Turkey currently carries the record of being the top growing economy in the world. Apart from these, Turkey has well established the fiscal discipline, unlike many European countries who could not recover after the global crisis. The financial sector is also very strong, especially due to the regulations imposed after 2001. Besides the chronic inflation problem, which lasted for decades until the new millennium is finally bygone thanks to the successful policies implemented in the last decade. Having taken a look at the economic condition in Turkey shortly, I would like to emphasize that U.S. as the #1 economy in the world, and Turkey as a promising growing economy, even in the current global economic turmoil, should find alternative ways to enhance the bilateral economic relationships. In this regard, we believe that the recent developments in the Arab world could help us pave the way for such a new solution. A potential Turkey-US collaboration as economic partners in the third countries, especially in the Middle East region, can turn into a win-win situation for both sides, for both countries. However, this kind of an attempt would naturally have opportunities as well as challenges. We claim this because we are sure that political transformation that is tried to be obtained in those countries will only survive with economic transformation. The so-called economic liberalization granted by the autocrats in the region could not go beyond a mafia-like system for decades. And as we all know, the revolutionary movements in the mentioned Arab countries came out as a breakout of the dismal economic conditions, including high unemployment, high inflation, poverty, hunger, and inequality. Therefore, the new regimes to be established will take to tackle major economic problems in the first place. In order for them to be able to do that, what they need is strong reforms as well as integration into the world economy. Right at this point, I would like to quote a statement from a speech of President Obama, as it fully represents our opinion on the matter. Now, it's important to focus on trade, not just aid, on investment, not just assistance, so to help the Arab countries who are trying to emerge from decades of stagnation, their global integration should be supported along with a strategic developmental model. In the meantime, it should be kept in mind that such transitions to democracy and market economy typically take a decade or so. However, hope and courage should be maintained during this process. I believe that the Indonesia example will be encouraging in this regard. As well known, after the 1997 East Asian financial crisis, riots and protests had reached peak levels in Indonesia as a result of economic insecurity in the society and even led to the collapse of the 30-year-old Suharto regime. After that, Indonesia has well managed to survive and even become 16th top biggest economy in the world. So why will a similar pattern not arise for the Arab countries either? In this framework, of course, international support is of critical importance, as mentioned earlier. If international community helps the construction of democratic and economic reformation of the Arab countries in the Middle East and North Africa, the consequences in the medium term will be very fruitful for both sides. In this sense, Turkey and US should definitely cooperate as strategic partners as they have specific advantages. On one hand, besides its geopolitical interests in the region, US has a good experience coming from its efforts on the consolidation of Europe after the World War, after the Second World War. On the other hand, Turkey has strong cultural, regional and historical ties with those countries and even acts as a soft power in the region. Plus, due to the democratic system and the successful economy it has, it's well respected by the mentioned countries. Therefore, as strategic allies in the region would bring economic and political benefits for both countries, while US would find a historic opportunity to create a sympathetic identity within the Arab countries. Turkey would strengthen its economic power in the region. Esteemed Chairman, having shortly conveyed our opinions on the strategic cooperation between US and Turkey in third countries, I would like to complete my speech here. I would like to thank you all participating and listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, let us turn to Mr. Vic Johnston, who probably more than anybody else in this city understands the U.S. Turkish economic ties, and listen to him what he will be saying in terms of economic cooperation and the opportunities in the third countries. Mr. Johnston, please.
Thank you, Erol Bey. Gokhan Bey, it's a pleasure to meet you, and also welcome to the MUSIAD delegation. An excellent gesture on your part of interest in working with the United States and pursuing these new markets that sometimes one wonders if they're out there, but they are, I'm certain of that. It's just we're in troubling times, of course, financially, so we tend to retract a bit. Also, good to see so many friendly faces. I'm going to emphasize the word friendly for the question and answer period. But I'm very, very pleased to be here and to have the opportunity to share some thoughts, but also very important from where I sit, particularly in my role as chairman of the U.S. Turkish Business Council, is to hear ideas. That's one of the key functions of the council, and we're not a static organization in that we are not coming up with just one set of ideas and then that's the end of it. We plan on continuing a very aggressive dialogue, both amongst the U.S. and the Turkish sections, as individual members, but then also reaching out to the business communities in both countries in order to really try to collect the best possible and fresh ideas, new ideas about how to improve what clearly, as my colleagues here at the table have mentioned, with good hard facts, an imbalance in both trade and investment. And it's somewhat surprising, given the dynamics of the Turkish economy and, if you will, the entrepreneurship that exists here, that there hasn't been a better connection between the two economies. We will, as the Council, and as all the various business organizations that now exist between Turkey and the United States, I think we're all really actively pursuing ideas that can facilitate the trade relationship. One of the things, throw out a random thought right off the bat. One of the things is that, as is rightly pointed out by the data, the economy of Turkey, in my experience, and for what it's worth, I've been doing business in and with Turks in Turkey, here in the United States on behalf of Turks for about 30 years now. So I have a bit of a historical perspective. And I have to say that the economy of Turkey today is vastly different than it was even 20 years ago. The capacities of the Turkish companies today and in the market in Turkey itself is extremely different. And unfortunately for the United States, we really have not come to realize that. It has not been a very well publicized or well recognized fact. As a result, as you in Turkey know better than we do here in the United States, you find yourself in a competitive position where you're trying to compete against Chinese or compete against the Thais or compete against even now Brazilians and all these other emerging markets that do get a lot of attention here in Washington and in the United States. So one of the things that I think is a challenge for all of us is to bring to bear closer attention to the capacities of Turkish business. Certainly the topic today, for example, about joint venturing, collaborating between Turkish and U.S. companies and seeking to pursue third country markets is a very, very topical one. It's one that I have firmly believed in for many years. And yet we seem to be always like ships passing in the night. The United States business people have a certain perspective and a certain orientation. And the Turkish entrepreneurs and businesses often look at life in the business world a lot differently than we do. So I think through MUSIAD, through your organization, Erol, we've got to really up our game, amplify the dialogue between the two business communities. The governments have been going at it now, as long as I know, and really, I guess the numbers speak for themselves. It's not been a very successful dialogue at the government level. So perhaps at the business level is where we've really got to focus our attention. Now, give you a little bit of background on what the Council is up to, because we just had our inaugural session in Istanbul on September 19th. We had, I believe it was 10 members of the Turkish section, private advisory group, and I believe we had 6 of us from the United States. Our Commerce Department handler is in the crowd, so I've got to be very careful what I say. But it was a great first meeting, and we have just designed, in fact, one of the reasons I was a bit late, and I apologize for that, was I was just finishing the set of recommendations that I and my colleague in Turkey, Gokhan, who chairs the Turkish section, we have just completed the draft of a report that we are now going to circulate amongst our members for final approval to then submit to the respective governments. We see ourselves, frankly, as a joint advisory group. Yes, we are Turkish business people or U.S. business people, but we are first and foremost business people. We are doing business in and with Turkey and in the United States. And what we're trying to do is help the governments better understand from an on-the-ground, real-life perspective what seems to be problems that the governments, can really do something about without too much heavy lifting. We're not talking about rewriting the GSP program and things like that. That's something, as I say, that's been a part of the dialogue now between the two governments for decades. We are more devoted to the idea of coming up with some fresh ideas, something that can be done not in the necessarily next month or even necessarily within a year, but fresh ideas that can help spark more of the kind of understanding that I talked about earlier in terms of how do Turks do business, how do U.S. companies do business, and how can we bring these two together more effectively, because there really is, I think, a natural affinity for the two types of business groups to work together. So in the council, we had a really successful first meeting. Undersecretary Sanchez was there, as well as Undersecretary Archi. We are going to come up with our, as I said, our initial set of recommendations very shortly to submit to the governments, and we'll take it from there. But I can tell you, amongst these recommendations, there's one very important idea that we are going to strongly assert, and that is this concept of collaboration and how to incentivize that using what tools the governments have to do so. Such ideas as industrial zones, where there's a collaboration between the United States, Turkish companies, and possibly third country participants. Let's use Iraq as an example, because in my mind it's a classic opportunity for U.S. and Turkish companies to work together to penetrate a huge market that is only going to grow and grow and grow over time, given their natural resource wealth and demand for the kinds of products and the kinds of know-how and skills that U.S. and Turkish companies can bring to the table. So, these are the types of things we're thinking about. How do the governments either, one, get out of the way, or two, help our companies come together, work together for mutual benefit to find these new markets and work there? I think that a theme that I've run across for years now in dealing with the challenges confronting our business communities is unfortunately best represented by the word risk. Right now, of course, you talk about Arab Spring development and projects that are potential in the Middle East, North African markets that are, we'll say, now changing, evolving. And speaking from a banking background, the risk premium in doing business in these countries is still very, very high. Now, of course, the U.S. government, Turkish government, other governments that are very interested in seeing these Arab Spring countries, we'll call it, benefit from their political movements towards a more democratized style of society, which should, in conjunction with that, embrace, let's call it, free enterprise a bit more aggressively. How do we, as a business community, suggest to the governments ways by which they can help us help these countries in the Middle East, North Africa region develop new job opportunities? Because that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, in terms of our national interests in these regional countries that are trying to nurture democratic and free enterprise systems. The challenge there is to create jobs, and job creation is not going to be driven by, it's not going to be driven organically in these countries. When you look at the data, economic data of each one of the countries, they are either desperate for foreign direct investment, or they are, in the very least, in very real need of know-how and new capacities in financing. It's not going to come from the internal resources that they have available to them. And in fact, it's a huge opportunity right now presenting itself to the United States and to Turks in terms of desire for this kind of foreign input. I know we read a lot in the media about, particularly in the Egyptian case, they don't really want to see foreign intervention and all of that. which I suppose when one considers Ottoman history, you too can be familiar with it if you're a Turk, about foreign interventions. But the bottom line is that the money, the know-how, the skill sets are going to have to come from the outside. How are they going to be most comfortable with that? If you look at a Tunisia or Morocco or Libya, Jordan, my sense is that they actually find Turkish entrepreneurship as exhilarating. They appreciate that. They like American attitude about doing business, best practices, things like that. And of course, everyone appreciates financing if you can bring it. So combining these strengths between Turkish and American enterprises, and then moving into a given market, a select market, doing your homework, and determining where there's a real need, where you're not going to, frankly, invest in a black hole that's just going to swallow up a lot of money and talent. But there are opportunities there. Unfortunately, it's that risk premium that is deterring at least American companies from going into these countries, into these markets right now, at least, in a more aggressive manner. On the other hand, you look at Turkish entrepreneurs, and it's largely, I believe, because they are not publicly held companies. A lot of the MUSIAD members, I would speculate, are actually closely held companies. They're not publicly listed. Therefore, frankly, they don't have boards of directors and they don't have shareholders that they have to constantly justify why they're making certain business decisions about. That gives the Turkish entrepreneur and the Turkish company an ability to deal with that risk premium in a far more aggressive manner than you'll find most U.S. corporations willing to undertake. What that suggests to me is that if a U.S. company still sees this market as a good future market or an area for expansion, but wants to try to minimize that risk premium, you collaborate, you partner with a company that's been there, it's done that, or at least it has the capacities to take on some of that risk without the kind of problems that you run into here at home if you did it only on your own. So in my mind, that from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense for American companies to be talking to Turkish companies insofar as Arab Spring, we call it, projects are concerned. But I wouldn't limit it to just the Middle East, North Africa. When you look at the opportunities, whether it's in Azerbaijan or Bulgaria or Romania, which many, many Turkish companies have already found exist, but are not being able to pursue it, either one because of a lack of finance, and it seems finance is always down there at the root of these problems, lack of finance, or perhaps even a bit of credibility, where an American firm coming in and partnering can all of a sudden draw attention, draw a sense of confidence that the project will have some integrity to it, if you want to use the chosen word. There again, great opportunities, I think, for U.S. and Turkish companies to collaborate in pursuing new markets there. It's the one thing I point out to my Turkish friends about working with American companies, and I'm speaking more to your MUSIAD delegation, who are obviously in search of partnerships and working relationships. American companies, as I say, they're relatively risk averse, and particularly in this environment, very, very risk averse. So whenever you're couching your presentation, or you're thinking in terms of how do I appeal to an American company to motivate some interest in working with me, a Turkish company, design your presentation, design your approach and your thinking to how do I address that risk aversion profile of the American company. And the way you do that at the very start, and this has held true in my experience for the past 30 years in working with Turkish companies, you're going to have a set of financial statements. If you walk in the door and you want to partner with an American company and you don't have a set of financial statements or an annual report or audit reports, you're barking up the wrong tree. It just won't work. So you're going to have sort of these fundamental, basic pieces of business information about your operation. Now, after that, when you start talking about, well, okay, I've got this great, I'm a Turkish company and I'm talking to an American, and I'm saying, look, I've got this great opportunity in Jordan, or I've got a great opportunity in Iraq, or maybe, Libya once it settles down. There again, you've got to be able to articulate your experience in these markets, these risky markets, in a way that demonstrates you really do know what's going on there. Don't go into an American company and suggest there's this great opportunity in Jordan. We haven't done any work there yet, but we know, I've got a brother or I've got a cousin who's living there, type of thing. That again, from how I've seen business conducted in Turkey, that is something that gives some people in Turkey comfort, but it's not something that an American business person will necessarily appreciate. So you've got to think about partnering with American companies by putting yourselves in an American company's shoes. Look at it from the American perspective. Recognize there's a huge amount of risk aversion right now, but also see yourself as a Turkish business person as someone who can probably help reduce that risk premium and perhaps provide the kind of comfort that American entrepreneur is looking for. I think the other advice I'd have regarding Turkish outreach to American companies is, I don't want to misstate this, U.S. multinationals have very deep pockets, but they also have extensive resources to determine how they want to do business somewhere. It doesn't hurt, of course, to let a multinational that has certain capacities that you think, as a Turkish business person, would be particularly applicable to a given business opportunity that you're aware of. But don't spend a lot of time and energy on that, because 9 times out of 10, it's the U.S. company that's going to want to go out and find their own partner. They don't usually take, we call it walk-ins. Whereas